Today we explore the work of the bassist John Kirby, leader of the biggest little band in the land. From 1938, this is From A Flat to C. The extremely slick John Kirby and his orchestra in 1938, From A Flat to C, a composition by the group's pianist Billy Kyle. And joining me today for this appreciation of John Kirby is Jeffrey Smith. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Julian. Great to be here.
Well, let's deal with the symphonic proportions of this orchestra. I mean, of course, it was just 6 men.
Yeah, it was, but they were all big band veterans. One of the interesting things about it is that it's a product of big band culture, and you can hear that in the way these things are so beautifully arranged, but there's cut down in scale, so there's nothing to excess. You haven't got screaming brass and screaming sections. You've got these beautifully chiseled details. So they're a small group that has some of the reflexes of a big band.
What's Kirby's background?
It's sort of sad. The very earliest years, he was abandoned as a kid and went through the orphanage circuit and came to New York. He took up the trombone and came to New York and probably got his trombone stolen. So he became a tuba player. And this was in the 20s. And he began to double on bass. He had an aluminum bass. Everything was, he was still playing it pretty far down in materialistic terms in those days. But he got a reputation fairly quickly for somebody who was very musical and had a good beat. And especially when the bass began to be more popular. As you could tell from that track, he has a very light sort of swinging style. Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys in the 30s that's a bridge toward the kind of more modern sound you get with Jimmy Blanton. And then he was very popular with leaders like Fletcher Henderson and Chick Webb.
And when did he really start to form his own sound in his own band?
Well, he was part of the Onyx Club 52nd Street set. He was with a septet that was, well, nobody was too sure who the leader was. Frankie Newton was in it, and Pete Brown was in it, and they were sort of a regular duo, like sort of Roy Eldridge and Chu Berry. They always traveled together. And Frankie and Pete had this band in which John Kirby was the bassist. And they sort of rotated the leadership or shared the leadership. And as I was saying before, that they come out of the big band culture, but they also come out of that 52nd Street jamming culture. So the group puts these two things together. And before there was the Kirby band. There was this jamming septet that recorded under various people's names. And the one recording we have of them with the proto-Kirby band is with Buster Bailey as the leader, a band that on the record is called Buster Bailey and His Rhythm Busters. And Frankie Newton's playing trumpet and Pete Brown's playing alto. And it's this fiery little tune called Dizzy Debutante.
Dizzy Debutante, John Kirby, as part of Buster Bailey's Rhythm Busters. Frank Newton was on trumpet, Buster Bailey clarinet, Pete Brown alto saxophone, Don Fryer piano, James McLinn guitar, John Kirby bass, and O'Neill Spencer on the drums. That was from 1937. What a great band.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think of that as one of what 52nd Street must have been like. You just pop in and you get hit by something like that. And it has that Kirby compactness and incisiveness. But it's also sort of a jam band. And I think that's what Kirby brought to his concept was something more organized and something more specific and detailed. He said he didn't like out-and-out jamming, In that sense, he was, a big band guy. Mm-hmm. But he was also a musician with very good ears about what he did want. And so when his band came out of this, it was the result of this sort of a blow-up. Frankie Newton and he had an argument. Frankie left. Pete Brown left. Mm-hmm. The guitar player left and was never replaced. The alto player, Pete Brown, was replaced by John Kirby's altoist, Russell Procope, and Charlie Shavers came in on trumpet. So you have this settled lineup. One of the interesting things about all these guys in the Kirby band is they're all northern musicians. They're all New York players. Ah. So you don't have that sort of, blues-drenched kind of, I want to tell my story kind of thing, It's a much more technically precise, technically conscious sort of approach. They like to do these compositional things. Mm. And they do that better than anybody.
So, well, that brings us to our trumpet player, Charlie Shavers, one of the great arrangers and composers of this, especially for this band.
Yeah, and he embodies the whole approach I've been talking about. Our opening tune from A flat to C, you heard this wonderful clean trumpet playing, which is the kind of thing he excelled at. And he was also a very fertile composer and arranger. And from their first recording session, he produced their first hit, which became a jazz standard. And it was this catchy little riff tune he didn't have a title for. So on the form where they wanted you to put down the title, he put down Undecided.
John Kirby and his Onyx Club Boys playing Charlie Shaver's composition Undecided. That was recorded in October 1938. They have that kind of New Orleans lean with the hits and the movement, but it's played in a New York way.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess what that really is to say is that they've imbibed this jazz essence from all over the place and made it their own. As we were saying, I mean, this is clearly, there's nothing artificial about this band. Nobody sat down in sort of pop idol sort of way and said, what kind of band would we have that will be? This is really the way they like to play. It reflects all their individual conceptions.
Yeah, and it's a group made of true individuals.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. With some of the same background, but with their own personalities. That's absolutely true.
Let's talk a little bit about Russell Procope.
He's, I suppose now his most famous association is with all those years, I mean, sort of 30 years or so he spent with Duke Ellington in that's the famous post-Ben Webster sax section. And I suppose people regard him as a kind of, a section player, impeccable, a wonderful musician. He's a very good jazz player. He's not great, but I mean, you can always count on him for these sort of wonderful, sinuous lines. And he's an immaculate part of the ensemble.
He certainly brings another side to the soloing from, say,
true.
Shavers and Buster Bailey.
No, that's perfectly true.
In particular.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about this group is they had the front line they wanted. I mean, trumpet, alto, and clarinet. With a front line like that, the temptation you would imagine would be, well, we got to get as many doubles as possible. You know, one of you guys has got to play tenor, maybe we can play baritone. They didn't do that at all. These three horns, with these three players, is exactly the sound they wanted. And the range they get, the range of effects they get within a chart from those three horns in the rhythm section is extraordinary.
Well, let's hear another track from the same session, October 38, and this is Rehearsing for a Nervous Breakdown. Rehearsing for a Nervous Breakdown, John Kirby and his Onyx Club Boys in October 1938. It reflects the title there, doesn't it, with the sort of ups and downs and the subtle dominance, if I can say this, of the piano.
Yeah, he's a presence all the way through, just flitting in. It's sort of like, you know, Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, flitting in all over the place. Well, and it's such a great chart because it doesn't end where you would expect it with this sort of drum explosion. It just takes it right down, and they're all playing, dancing around the bass. It's terrific.
Well, the next track shows their earthy side, their blues side.
Yeah, and they could play the blues. I mean, when I said that they weren't New Orleans players, this doesn't mean a whole lot because they're steeped in it. And this has effervescent blues, has this nice rolling sort of boogie feel that carries all before it too.
And Kyle also, we hear more from him and alludes to the future of the way the piano's to develop.
Yeah, but he did whenever he played. I mean, after he was the guy who most influenced. Well, I don't know if he most influenced, but he was a big influence, always credited on Bud Powell. Bud loved him. And so did Dave Brubeck, come to that.
Well, this is Effervescent Blues. Effervescent Blues by trumpeter Charlie Shavers, John Kirby and his orchestra, and that was recorded in January 1939. I forgot to mention, actually, the obvious use of the boogie-woogie left hand in the piano.
Yeah.
Obviously, things change quite dramatically when Billy Kyle takes a solo.
Yeah, but you're just aware of all the different idioms they have at their command. I mean, it's not like, okay, let's do a boogie. They're always going to do it their way and bring in other elements as well, which is what creates this such an interesting mix that they get in every piece.
Well, he further makes the music interesting because he loved to make swinging versions of classical pieces.
Yes, for good or ill. Most of the time, it's very good. But this was a swing era shtick, just as you say, to bring in new material and slightly tongue in cheek a lot of the time. It's like the swinging folk music too. That sort of different sorts of material. The one we're about to hear is Anitra's Dance from Grieg, and they give it this. They're faithful to the melody, but they give it this really wonderful sort of spiky treatment at the beginning.
Edvard Grieg's Anitra's Dance with a touch of the John Kirby. That was recorded in May 1939. Beautifully arranged.
Yeah, and very musical. I mean, it's one of the things you keep coming back to about this group, just how musical it is and how much, I was saying earlier that how much pleasure they take in their musicality. In a certain way, it's very simple. I guess what I mean by that is I was struck by, again, talking about they just play these three horns. Nobody doubles. I mean, Charlie Shavers plays mutes or not, but it's just these three horns. And at the same time, you have some harmonic passages, but a lot of time you just get these unisons. They really like the sound of these instruments and what they can do with pure melodic lines.
And, I mean, unison is a very powerful arranging tool.
Yeah, and not easy. Not easy to execute, because you got to be absolutely in tune or it's going to sound awful. And they always are, you know.
And Shavers is very important in terms of these arrangements.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Even when when he's doing his classical thing, sometimes you get a lot more shavers than you do classical. I mean, one of my favorite arrangements is this Opus 5, which people credit as Chopin shavers, and apparently he said he got it from Chopin, but its provenance is very obscure. Nobody exactly knows what their Chopin is, but it's very wonderful shavers, and it's a great chart that shows the full range of the band's dynamics. I mean, it's very much open horn. It has this really storming out chorus, and O'Neill Spencer sounds wonderful. I mean, great cooking drummer. It makes you think of this thing that Charlie Shaver said about their dynamic range. They could play so soft you could hear a gnat walk across a piece of cotton or blow you clean out of the joint.
Well, I should say pay particular attention also to Billy Kyle, who plays an amazing piano solo.
I think you're just stuck on him.
John Kirby and his orchestra, and this is Opus 5. John Kirby and Opus 5, recorded in July 1939. Quick name check: Charlie Shavers on the trumpet, Buster Bailey on clarinet, Russell Procope on alto saxophone, Billy Kyle on piano, and O'Neill Spencer on the drums.
Don't they sound wonderful?
Execution.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feeling of... In this band, one of the things is it doesn't matter what the dynamic level is. They always play with this wonderful, bright attack. They're always really up front, you know, but not in any way coarse about it. But it's all very brilliant. I guess that's the word.
Well, we're going to hear this brilliant band, how they adapt their sound to working with a singer. In particular, Maxine Sullivan, who was Kirby's wife.
That's right. That's right. It's a sort of an ideal showbiz marriage because she'd had a big hit in '37 with I mentioned earlier the folk song, swinging folk song vogue. She sort of started it with her recording of Loch Lomond, and they got married in '38, and then she started to work with the group.
Well, this next piece, they play in such a relaxed and poised way. The intro is very unusual as well.
Yeah, it's true. It is a piece of sort of quasi-folk. You know, it's meant to sound, you know, sort of like bagpipes and stuff, I guess. But they get this wonderful, almost serene, airy feeling, which suits Maxine's sound perfectly.
This is If I Had a Ribbon Bow.
If I had a ribbon bow to tie my hair and a gown of calico that I could wear, I'd surely get a sweetheart, a prince or a king, a palace home where I would have everything. If I had a ribbon bow to tie my hair, this old world could come and go, I wouldn't care. I'd stay up in my castle and I'd always wear a ribbon bow so fine to tie my hair all the livelong day. To the Lord above me, all I do is pray for someone to love me. If I had a ribbon bow all nice and clean, I could be a princess or a fairy queen. Prince Charming then would court me, his love he would swear. If I had a ribbon bow to tie my hair. There's a story of a girl, a story seldom told. What she wanted from this world was not of gems or gold. Her wishes were quite plain, as you will see. For often she would simply make this plea all the livelong day. To the Lord above me, all I do is pray for someone to love me. If I had a ribbon bow all nice and clean, I could be a princess or a fairy queen. Prince Charming then would court me, his love he would swear. If I had a ribbon bow, a pretty little ribbon bow, Prince Charming then would court me, his love he would swear. If I had a ribbon bow to tie my hair.
The great Maxine Sullivan singing so in the center of the music there with her husband, John Kirby, and his orchestra. That was If I Had a Ribbon Bow, recorded in 1940.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I'm surprised it isn't. I was going to say I'm surprised it isn't better known, but then you feel that way about
Everything.
Yeah, you do. You do. I mean, it's one of the reasons you want to go to war for the history of the music, because there's so much around like this that's so wonderful.
Well, let's have a little. We should mention the engineering going on there.
Yes, I wonder. That's so much engineering as sabotage. You're creating a little sound experiment between choruses. He brought the level down and then decided it was this mistake, brought it back up again. I don't know. Maybe somebody's little son got into the studio or something.
This band obviously play a wide range of material, and the next piece we're going to hear is an old standard from the 1920s.
Yeah. Some would say schlock, but this is unkind. But it is the kind of tune that people would have wanted to hear. And by this time, the Kirby band was, playing some fairly posh venues. And it was the kind of tune that some of the clientele would have requested. Good ones like Coquette. But they bring it alive because of the way they handle it.
It's July 1940, and that was John Kirby and Coquette of Old Dixieland Fair.
Yeah, but they sure play it like they mean it. I mean, I guess it almost goes without saying that's one of their secrets. They play everything like they mean it.
And we're now going to hear them play the blues.
Yes, and another approach from effervescent blues, and this has a sort of a witty minor opening, sort of I wants to make your flesh creep sort of thing. But it's cute and it's witty, and yet it's very bluesy at the same time.
Blues Petite. The John Kirby Orchestra of Six playing Blues Petite in 1940. And they were really playing the blues there.
Yep, they were. They were all, as you say, all six of them. And it was rare at the time for a small band to have such success. I mean, that whole idea of chamber jazz had very much gotten off the ground with, you know, Benny Goodman's small groups, but they were bands within a band. I mean, there weren't that many small bands around making this kind of commercial noise, being a small band and in that kind of great media success.
Well, they had a radio show, didn't they?
Well, that's right. And as of 1940, they had, which was even more untoward, this 15-minute show, you know, small slot, small band, called Flow Gently, Sweet Rhythm. But as we've heard, they can do an immense amount in fairly contracted circumstances. So they got packed a lot of music in, and they had, you know, Maxine Sullivan was singing with them as well, Mrs. Kirby. So it gave the show a lot of quality and a lot of diversity.
The next piece we're going to hear comes from their broadcast, doesn't it?
Yep. And it's, again, something you might not expect. We've heard him do Coquette from the 20s, but original Dixieland One Step is one of the old trad showcases. I mean, a real war horse from New Orleans. And they make that their own, too. It's not in any way tongue-in-cheek. They really play it like they mean it. And also, there's an incredible solo by Charlie Shavers. We've talked about his musicianship and his chops, but this is a particularly striking example. It should be pointed out that he had a cousin who was a trumpet player, younger cousin named of Fats Navarro, who was obviously paying a lot of attention to Charlie with the same kind of wonderful blistering attack and use of the mute a lot.
Original Dixieland One Step. John Kirby and Band and Original Dixieland One Step from 1940. Buster Bailey really came out of his shell there, so to speak, but Charlie Shavers was the star.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also sort of signs of the times in a way, because you can hear them as, in a certain sense, as sort of proto-bop. And I always think of, these unisons. I think of, in 3-4 years, it's going to be Bird and Diz playing, alto and trumpet unisons. Mm-hmm. And lines, it's different. I mean, this is still a swing band. Mm-hmm. But there is something in that texture. And also the cool thing as well, because this very contained, very precise kind of style is going to be, in a few years, is going to be Miles and the Cool thing.
At this time, they signed with RCA Victor, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't know whether that was. I mean, it was a career move of a certain kind. They might have had more money because they were certainly big at the time. But it's the beginning of a different sort of feeling in the band. I mean, for one thing, O'Neill Spencer had to drop out for illness, and they got another drummer who was Specs Powell. Specs Powell's a fine player, but. I also get the feeling that it's becoming a little harder to find new things to say with this format. But there's still wonderful things, and it's still very swinging.
Well, here they are in 1941 with a Billy Carl original, and this is Tweed Me. Tweed Me from October 1941, an amazing piano solo from pianist and the composer of that track, Billy Kyle, with a spontaneous arrangement right at the end there.
Yeah, just terrific. Just terrific.
Well, John Kirby's importance in jazz history is undeniable.
It's true, and I think he's getting more recognition from current players. I think he had a bad press for a while because, especially in the more funk-conscious eras of jazz, the band seems sort of effete and precious, and the B word, bourgeois, can't have that, But I think now the kind of values they represent are being appreciated for the rare things they were. And Don Byron, that wonderful clarinet player, he's starting to play John Kirby arrangements, and there are a couple of bands, one in France, one in New York, that are resurrecting a lot of the output. And I think he should be given credit for that combination of polish and verve, which is so important to jazz. And also the sense, as we've been saying, that you had these individuals that were producing arrangements that weren't just arrangements. There wasn't a sense in which they were sort of sacrificing themselves for a group sound. Their individuality was the group sound.
Yeah.
And you can't have, that's really important. You can't say that enough. And I think that's what comes across.
In addition, their band sound is one of the major contributors to the bebop movement, to the way that the rhythm section worked.
Well, it seems like, it's a small thing, but a significant thing that it was a three-man rhythm section. There was no guitar. So it's one of the first times you don't have that chunk, chunk, chunk going on. And it's much more fluid in the sense that the bassy band was important because of, Basie's floating right hand over, the grooving rhythm section. And here, the rhythm section is even lighter and more open because there isn't a guitar. And that would become the bebop sound. And O'Neill Spencer, he's not to be underrated. He was a hell of a drummer, and he has that same kind of Joe Jones floating feeling. So, it's too bad that, the war came along, which is really what put paid to the group. Charlie Shaver said what really killed off the John Kirby Sextet was the Japanese, because after that, when the war came along, everybody started getting drafted. Billy Kyle was the first one to go.
Right.
So you really don't have since it was based so much on these individuals. If you didn't have the individuals, it was really going to be tough. John Kirby, he got substitutes, including at one point Dizzy Gillespie was in the band, but it wasn't quite the same, and it wasn't the same after the war. He did put together a reunion concert, a grand reunion concert in Carnegie Hall, and instead of getting O'Neill Spencer, they got Big Sid Catlett, who can play, but it bombed.
Right.
It was a complete failure. They got, almost nobody came, and that was clearly over. It was over partly because bop really was around big time, and it was a completely different sound. More aggressive in a certain kind of way. And it's also, one of the things I was thinking about today was this is not a music in which you stretch out.
Right.
Everything is very much cued to this kind of scale. You're not going to get somebody playing 27 choruses. You're not going to get Bird doing his, that fiery thing. They're very wonderful for what they do, but it has to be on and reduced to those dimensions, which suit them very well.
Well, thank you to my very special guest, Jeffrey Smith.
Thank you, Julian. A pleasure as always.
And we end today with a later version of the sextet with Specs Powell on drums. From 1942, this is St. Louis Blues.
And one thing you should listen for in this record, we haven't talked much about Buster Bailey, but he's an amazing technician, and he shows you his mastery of circular breathing with holding one note through 4 choruses while the band scampers around beneath him.
St. Louis Blues, recorded by John Kirby and his orchestra in 1942. Jazz Legends was presented by Julian Joseph in conversation with Jeffrey Smith.